They always say the past catches up with you. But no one ever warns you that sometimes it arrives through a phone call in the middle of a storm, with a voice that sounds like it's smiling while tearing your world apart. I was in Seattle, watching rain slide down my hotel window, the city lights turning everything outside into a blur of gold and gray. I had just wrapped a long day of meetings, ready to relax, maybe order room service. That was when the call came in. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something in my gut twisted before I even answered. "Claire," came the voice, sharp and smooth like ice cracking underfoot. "I thought I should let you know that the trust fund is gone. Sabrina's going to put it to much better use than you ever would." My fingers stiffened around the phone. "Vanessa," I said slowly, already recognizing the venom laced in every syllable. "What did you just say?" She let out a smug chuckle. "It's done. Transferred. You were always such a disappointment, and now Sabrina can finally have the wedding and home she deserves. Consider it balance restored." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That trust fund was all I had left of my mother, her safety net for me after losing her to a brutal illness at 16. Vanessa, my stepmother, had been trying to sink her claws into it since the day she married my father 2 years after Mom died. She had always resented that it existed. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she could never predict, was that I had already seen the storm coming. "Thanks for letting me know," I said flatly, my voice steady despite the fire crawling through my veins. There was silence on the other end, and I imagined her narrowing her eyes, thrown off by my lack of emotion. "That's all you have to say," she finally snapped. "Is there anything else you need, Vanessa?" I replied coolly. "You're just going to let this happen," she sneered. "You already made your choice. Now you'll live with the consequences." And with that, I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was the tremor that comes before a storm breaks loose. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo of my mother, worn at the edges, always with me on the road. Her eyes were bright, her smile calm. She had built her own medical consultancy from nothing, and the trust was her final gift to me, the promise that I could build something of my own one day. 6 months ago, I had received a call from Mr. Roland Graves, her longtime lawyer and the only man my mother had truly trusted outside our family. He had warned me that Vanessa had been asking questions, trying to access restricted financial information. He suggested we put protections in place. Legal ones. Unshakable ones. And we did. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing Graves. "She finally made her move," I said without preamble. "She thinks she's won." "She hasn't," he replied, calm as ever. "We received the alerts. All attempts to access the account were flagged and blocked. Not a single dollar was touched." I felt my shoulders relax slightly, even as my jaw remained tight. "Every attempt was recorded?" I asked, down to the timestamp. Forged documents, phone calls, even the emails. All archived. "Claire, we're ready whenever you are. Send everything to the family attorney. Copy my father in." "You sure?" "She's been playing games for over a decade. It's time someone flipped the board." As I hung up, I booked the earliest flight to Denver. I wasn't going home for a fight. I was going to end one. The next morning, Denver greeted me with a sky like slate and a cold wind that stung my cheeks as I stepped out of the airport. Autumn was in full command here, trees half naked, leaves tumbling across sidewalks like discarded truths. As my car pulled into the old neighborhood, I saw my childhood home come into view. It looked the same, but everything about it felt haunted. I hadn't lived there in years, not since I left for college and never looked back. The house was still painted that soft blue my mother loved, but now the shutters were faded, and the roses she once nurtured had withered under Vanessa's rule. The place had become a hollow version of what it used to be, a backdrop for a performance I had no desire to watch anymore. I had called my father the night before, told him I was flying in, and needed to speak with him urgently. I didn't mention Vanessa. I didn't mention the trust fund. Some things had to be done face to face, no matter how far you'd run to avoid them. The front door opened before I could knock. My father stood there in his maroon sweater, graying hair neatly combed, his face lined with more years than I remembered. Behind him, Vanessa hovered, dressed too perfectly for a morning at home, her lips pulled into a tight line. And beside her, of course, was Sabrina, her daughter, her golden child, who looked both confused and slightly amused by my arrival. "Claire, my father said with tentative warmth. This is a surprise. Not really, Vanessa interrupted, her voice syrupy and false. She always manages to show up when there's drama to stir. I ignored her and stepped inside. The air smelled like potpourri and old tension. I handed my coat to no one and walked directly into the living room. The same old fireplace, the same picture frames, but now filled with smiling photos of Vanessa and Sabrina, while my mother's presence had been scrubbed clean from the walls. I need to show you something, I said to my father, pulling the envelope from my bag. What is this about? He asked. Your wife attempted to steal my inheritance, I said, placing the documents on the coffee table. And I can prove it. The color drained from Vanessa's face as I opened the folder. One by one, I laid out the evidence. Copies of forged transfer requests, bank alerts, email correspondence, all time-stamped, authenticated, and cross-verified by Mr. Graves. I don't know what you think you're doing, Vanessa began, trying to smile, her voice suddenly trembling. This is all a misunderstanding. It's not, I said sharply. You tried to steal money left to me by my mother. You tried to falsify documents and transfer it to Sabrina. My father picked up the papers with trembling hands. As he scanned the lines, I saw his eyes narrow with confusion, then betrayal. His breathing changed. The room had gone still, like the moment before thunder cracks. Vanessa, he said slowly, is this true? She didn't answer. Sabrina looked between us all, her face paling, her confidence draining away. Mom, you said it was allowed. That Claire never even used the money. Vanessa turned on her daughter, eyes flashing. You're not helping. I didn't know. Sabrina cried. I thought you said the account was just forgotten, that it would be better used for our future. I stayed silent, watching the walls crumble. The silence pressed in. This has been going on for years, I finally said to my father. She's been trying to wear you down, distort the truth, and isolate you from anything my mother left behind. My father looked at me, his voice hollow. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Because I needed proof, I said. You wouldn't have believed me. Not when everything you saw was filtered through her lies. His hands lowered. The papers slid from his grip and scattered across the table like confetti from a shattered celebration. Claire, he whispered, I didn't know. I swear to you I had no idea. Vanessa stepped forward. Charles, please. You know I love this family. I was only trying to keep things fair. Claire never even touched that money. She doesn't need it. Sabrina is starting her life. I'm not discussing fairness with a woman who forged my signature, he said quietly, his voice a tremor of suppressed rage. You can't do this, Vanessa snapped. After everything I've done for you. I want you out of this house, my father said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sabrina gasped. Vanessa looked as though she'd been slapped. You don't mean that. I do. And my lawyer will be in touch. I want a full audit of our accounts. I want to know what else you've been hiding. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. Sabrina reached for her, unsure whose side she was supposed to be on anymore. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken loud enough. As Vanessa stumbled from the room, her perfect composure cracking with every step, I looked out the window. The same tree I used to climb as a kid still stood in the yard. Its leaves had turned red, shedding the past one gust at a time. This house had buried too many truths. It was time to dig them up. The storm had passed by morning, but the silence in the house was heavier than thunder. Vanessa and Sabrina were gone, though not quietly. There had been yelling, crying, and a slammed door so hard the photo frames rattled. My father hadn't said a word since. He sat in the dining room with a cup of coffee, both hands wrapped around it like it might keep him grounded. I stood in the hallway, staring at a spot on the wall where a family portrait used to hang. The frame was gone. Only a faint square of dust and sun-bleached paint remained. I wondered how long it had been missing. How long my mother had been erased from the home she built. I found something last night, my father finally said, his voice raw. After you went to bed, I stepped into the room. He pushed a thin envelope across the table. It was yellowed slightly, with a name written on the front in delicate cursive. Claire. My breath caught. I was cleaning out the old storage closet, he said. Vanessa always kept it locked. But I broke the padlock. Inside was a box labeled with your mom's handwriting. This was inside. I sat down slowly, staring at the envelope. My hands hesitated before picking it up. The paper was soft and fragile at the edges, like it had waited years to be touched again. I opened it with care, unfolding the single sheet inside. The handwriting was instantly familiar. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I'm so sorry I can't be there to watch you grow into the woman I know you're meant to become. But I needed you to know something I didn't have the strength to say out loud. The trust fund I set up for you isn't just money. It's my way of giving you room to breathe, to take chances, to fail and try again. It's the freedom I never had when I started my business. Don't let anyone tell you what you deserve, especially not someone who never saw your light. You are smarter than they think, stronger than they believe, and when the time comes, you'll know what to do. I trust you. Love, Mom. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw the drops on the paper. I wiped my cheeks quickly, folded the letter again, and tucked it back into the envelope. My father's eyes were misty, but he didn't speak. He just looked at me like he was finally seeing something he'd missed for years. She left it for you, he said quietly. And I never knew. She tried to warn me, I whispered. She must have seen what Vanessa was capable of. We sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, my father stood and walked to the window. The same backyard where we used to play catch now looked unfamiliar, trimmed and sterile. Like everything else, it had been tidied into something unrecognizable. I let her take over everything, he said. After your mom passed, I was drowning. And Vanessa made it easy to stop thinking. She said she'd help rebuild the family. I didn't realize she was replacing it. You weren't ready, I said. None of us were. He nodded, still looking outside. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not here to punish you, I said. But I won't pretend it didn't hurt. That was the closest we had come to understanding in over a decade. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was healing, like air finally returning to a room long suffocated. Later that day, I met with Mr. Graves in his office. He was already reviewing the financial logs. Vanessa's attempts to drain the trust fund were clumsy, and she left a trail a mile wide. Not just on my account, but my father's too. She's been skimming small amounts from your father's personal investments for years, Graves said, flipping through statements. Always under thresholds that would trigger alerts. Do we have enough for a case? I asked. We have enough for multiple charges, but I suspect she'll settle to avoid jail. Do it. File everything. He paused. Are you sure? She buried my mother's legacy, I said. I'm just digging it back out. He nodded and began drafting the paperwork. That night, I walked through the house alone, room by room. Each one had a memory buried beneath new paint or replaced furniture. In the upstairs office, my mother's old study, I found a stack of untouched boxes. Inside one was her business journal. I flipped through it slowly, seeing notes, timelines, supplier contacts. It was like discovering her all over again. On the inside cover, she had written one sentence. One day, this will be hers. The next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It wasn't just about reclaiming what Vanessa tried to steal. It was about building something with it. Something that would carry my mother's name, not as a shadow, but as a legacy reborn. 3 weeks after returning to Denver, I signed the lease on a narrow office space in the heart of Seattle's historic Pioneer Square. The building was old brick, ivy creeping up the side, with warped wooden floors that creaked under every step. Most people would have turned it down for something more modern. But when I stepped inside, I saw potential. It reminded me of the place my mother started her own consultancy, humble, raw, and full of promise. I named the firm Dawson Strategic Solutions. Not because I needed to see my last name in print, but because it was hers first. Before she married, before she changed it for love, it was the name she used when she launched her business, the one she kept on every contract, every invoice, every proposal. She had never stopped being Dawson. And now neither would I. The trust fund became the seed capital, lawfully and safely withdrawn. I used it to cover 3 months of rent, hire a graphic designer for branding, and bring on a junior analyst named Harper who reminded me of my younger self, sharp, observant, and just a little unsure of her own power. Graves continued handling Vanessa's case. As predicted, she struck a plea deal. Avoided jail, but agreed to pay restitution and was barred from ever working in finance again. She moved to Arizona to live with a sister I'd never heard her mention before. The money she'd taken from my father was slowly returned, piece by piece, thanks to the court's order. Sabrina emailed me once. A long, rambling apology about how she had never understood the truth. How she had been blinded by what her mother told her. How she was sorry for everything she said and did. I read it once, closed the tab, and didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because not all wounds are ready to speak. My father, for his part, was trying. He visited Seattle 2 weeks after I opened the office. Showed up with a box of old files from my mother's company, documents I didn't even know still existed. Original service contracts, her first logo drafts, even a napkin with the name of her first client scribbled on it. He handed them over wordlessly, then looked around the room. "She'd be proud," he said. I wanted to believe him. I think a part of me did. We had lunch together that day, and for the first time in years, we didn't talk around things. He told me about the early days, how he met my mother at a conference in Chicago, how they started the business from the basement of a rented duplex, how she used to wake up at 4 to research clinical reports before I even stirred. His eyes lit up as he spoke, like remembering her made him younger. She was always 3 steps ahead, he said. Even when I thought I was leading, she already had a better plan. I smiled. She taught me everything that matters. Business was slow at first. We took on smaller clients, regional medical clinics, wellness startups, independent biotech reps, but I poured everything into each one. I read every line of their policies, mapped their inefficiencies, restructured their strategies. Word spread. Within 6 months, we were profitable. At night, I worked from the same worn desk I'd brought from my apartment. On it sat the framed letter my mother wrote. I had preserved it behind glass, the ink just slightly faded, the words more powerful every time I read them. One evening, Harper walked into my office as I was closing up. She paused, staring at the photo of my mom on the wall behind me. "Is that who taught you all this?" I nodded. "In more ways than I can explain. She looks fearless." She was, but only because she prepared like no one else. That's the real secret. Strength isn't about charging into the fire. It's knowing where all the exits are before you even strike the match. Harper smiled. "I think I want to be like her." I met her eyes. "You will be, if you want it enough." After she left, I sat there a while longer, lights dimmed, the city outside humming with late-night taxis and foghorns. I thought about the past, about all the times Vanessa made me feel like a shadow in my own house, all the words Sabrina threw like darts, all the moments I swallowed the truth to keep peace that never existed. I didn't need to pretend anymore. My office was quiet, my future open, and my mother's voice, clear as ever, still guiding me forward. I was finally standing on my own foundation, and it was made of steel. Success is a strange way of stirring the past. I had started to believe I was finally free, that the trauma had been exorcised the moment Vanessa stepped out of our lives. But ghosts don't knock. They don't wait for invitations. They walk right in when you least expect them. It began with a letter. Not from the court, not from a client. It was a simple envelope, no return address, slipped under the door of my office after hours. Inside, a printed message, no signature, no handwriting. "You think this is over?" I stared at the words for a long time. They were centered, typed in all lowercase, a font too clean to feel threatening, yet the silence around them screamed. My stomach turned. For a brief second, I wondered if it was Vanessa. But no, she was banned from financial activity. She wouldn't risk another charge. She had lawyers, conditions, restrictions. But Sabrina? That was a different story. The next day, I received an email from a mutual acquaintance in Denver. Apparently, Sabrina had begun publicly speaking about inheritance injustice and framing herself as the one who had been robbed. She hadn't mentioned me by name, but she didn't have to. In tight social circles, people connected the dots fast. There were whispers, subtweets. Someone posted a blurry picture of my office exterior with the caption, "Trust Fund Princess Strikes Gold." I had worked too hard, built too honestly, to let petty bitterness taint what this company stood for. Still, I felt it. Beneath my ribs, the ache of old wounds trying to reopen. Harper noticed I was quieter that week. She didn't push. But one night, as I stood alone by the copy machine, she handed me a small, sticky note. Her words, "Don't change your truth." That simple sentence felt like armor. I called my father that evening. Told him about the letter. About Sabrina's stories. He was quiet for a while, then said, "You can't control how someone else rewrites the story in their head. All you can do is keep living yours with integrity. And what if her lies undo everything? They won't, because lies rot from the inside. You've already built from something solid." The next day, I met with Graves again. We reviewed Vanessa's settlement terms and confirmed Sabrina was not legally allowed to access or speak on details of the trust fund. She had signed that herself during the proceedings. Graves sent a formal cease and desist. We didn't hear anything for a while after that. Weeks passed. Then, one Friday morning, I was in the middle of a pitch with a potential client, a big biotech firm out of San Diego, when Harper burst into the meeting room, pale and breathless. "There's someone in the lobby," she whispered. "She says she's your sister." My spine stiffened. "Sabrina." I excused myself and walked out, heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. There she was, standing by the front desk in a cream coat, too polished for a casual visit. Her hair curled, her makeup perfect. But her eyes were glassy, red-rimmed, desperate. "I just need 5 minutes," she said quickly, hands trembling. "Please." I hesitated, then nodded once. We stepped into the empty conference room. She sat down before I did, folding her hands like she was afraid of what they might do if left loose. "I didn't write the letter," she said. "I swear. But I've been angry. And confused. And yeah, maybe I said things I shouldn't have. I didn't think anyone would take it seriously." I said nothing. Just watched her. "Mom lied to me for years," she continued, her voice cracking. "She told me you were selfish. That you only got what you had because you manipulated everyone. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Because the alternative was admitting that maybe she didn't love me the way she said she did." I let out a slow breath, every emotion I had buried trying to rise up and speak. "I don't want your money," Sabrina whispered. "I don't want your firm. I think I need your forgiveness." Forgiveness. A heavy word, one that didn't always arrive when summoned. "I don't know if I have that to give," I said honestly. "But I know what it's like to be lied to by someone you trusted." She nodded slowly. "That's more than I deserve." We sat in silence, two women shaped by the same storm, finally acknowledging the wreckage. As she stood to leave, I said one last thing. "Stop telling the world your version of my story. Start figuring out your own." She paused at the door. "I will." And then she was gone. That night, I locked up the office myself. Sat in the dark for a while, watching the city breathe beyond the windows. My mother's photo looked back at me from the wall, unbothered by the chaos. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of calm. Like maybe closure wasn't a dramatic finale. Maybe it was a hallway, quiet, slow, built one honest step at a time. And I was finally walking through it. It was early spring when we signed our biggest client yet. A multi-state healthcare network had reached out after hearing about the results we delivered for a smaller diagnostics company. Their email was brief but promising. They wanted a complete restructuring of their regional operations, and they wanted me to lead it. By April, Dawson Strategic Solutions had tripled in size. Harper was promoted to lead analyst. We brought in 2 new consultants and leased the second floor of our building. I found myself working long nights again, not out of survival but out of vision. Every strategy deck, every systems audit, every performance model we built felt like carving my mother's initials into something permanent. My father visited often now. He loved being around the office, even helped train one of our new hires. Everyone started calling him Charlie, and I watched him become someone lighter, someone who no longer flinched at the mention of the past. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd stand by the photo wall we created near reception. Pictures of my mother, our early clients, handwritten thank you notes. He never touched anything, just stood there and smiled softly. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I opened a dusty box my father had brought from the attic. Inside were my mother's old notebooks. Among them, one caught my eye. The cover was cracked leather, her name embossed on the front, Evelyn Dawson. Inside were pages of client meeting notes, sales strategies, and at the very back a list of goals. Things to build, people to teach, legacy to protect. I stared at those words for a long time. This was never just about business for her. It was about shaping something that would keep helping others long after she was gone. Inspired, I started a new initiative, the Evelyn Fund, a mentorship program for women entering the healthcare consulting world. We partnered with 2 universities and set up scholarships for students from underserved backgrounds. Harper helped design the curriculum. My father offered to teach one of the workshops. The launch event took place in our newly renovated conference space. We invited past clients, mentors, and young professionals. The room buzzed with voices, handshakes, and promise. I stood near the podium, holding the speech I'd rewritten a dozen times. But when I stepped up to the mic, I didn't look at my notes. I looked at the photo of my mother on the back wall, and I spoke from memory. My mother always told me that success without service is hollow. She built her company not to climb over others, but to lift them. And she left me the tools to do the same. What started as her dream became my mission. And now it becomes a legacy we share. The applause was thunderous. But it wasn't for me. It was for her. After the event, as I walked through the quiet office, I found a note slipped under my door again. My breath caught for a moment. Another anonymous letter. I opened it cautiously. This time, it was handwritten. Thank you for not closing the door on me. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. Sabrina's. I didn't know where that would lead. But I folded the note and placed it next to my mother's letter in the drawer. It didn't mean the past was healed, but it meant it no longer had control over the narrative. Later that night, as the city dimmed beneath the soft blanket of midnight, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than usual. The air smelled like rain and renewal. And for once, the silence felt full, not empty. The woman I used to be, the girl who once clung to silence to survive, was gone. In her place stood someone with a name on the wall, a team at her back, and a legacy in motion. I walked away with my heels echoing on the pavement, confident, prepared, and finally free. Just as the business settled into rhythm, an unexpected email arrived in my inbox with the subject line, Media Inquiry Regarding Trust Fund Dispute. At first, I thought it was spam. But the sender was real, an investigative journalist from a reputable financial outlet. He had been tipped off anonymously, he claimed, about a high-profile inheritance battle involving a young woman, her stepmother, and a trust fund dispute that nearly resulted in fraud charges. He didn't mention names, but his questions cut too close to the bone. Was I willing to comment? Would I confirm or deny the involvement of my firm or family? I sat frozen at my desk, reading the email over and over. My first instinct was panic, then anger, then clarity. I forwarded the message to Mr. Graves, who responded within minutes. Asterisk, say nothing. I'll handle it, asterisk. But even silence didn't stop the noise. 3 days later, an online forum picked up on the story, piecing together hints and photos scraped from public accounts. Old pictures of Sabrina and me at a family barbecue. A blurry shot of Vanessa at a business event. Someone even dredged up court documents from the fraud proceedings. Public records, barely redacted. Rumors spread fast. Clients began asking quiet questions. My staff was uneasy. I overheard Harper telling one of our analysts, she doesn't talk about it. Ever. I knew I had to address it. Not through a press release or a defensive statement, but in the way I had always rebuilt what others tried to tear down, with honesty. At the next team meeting, I stood in front of everyone, heart racing but spine straight. You may have heard things, I began. Some of it's true. Some of it isn't. Years ago, someone tried to take what my mother left for me. I chose not to let that happen. Not through bitterness. Not through vengeance. But through preparation and truth. Everything I've built here came from that moment, the decision to take control of my future rather than be a victim of someone else's. The room was silent. Then Harper clapped. Then others joined. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. I wasn't hiding anymore. That same week, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership panel in Portland. The keynote topic? Turning pain into power, women who lead through adversity. I hesitated before accepting. Speaking publicly meant exposing myself further. But Grace encouraged me. You don't need to tell the whole story. Just your part of it. At the event, I wore my mother's brooch, a small silver fern she used to pin to her jackets when she wanted to feel strong. The room was filled with executives, founders, and students. I told them about risk, about strategy, but mostly about legacy. Leadership isn't about being loud, I said. It's about knowing who you are when everything around you tries to rewrite your story. You don't have to shout to be strong, but you do have to stand. Afterward, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She had been through her own family betrayal. She said hearing me speak gave her the courage to finally file a claim she'd been putting off for years. That moment stayed with me longer than the applause. Back in Seattle, we started getting new client requests, this time from companies that had heard me speak, who wanted not just consultants, but leadership partners. Dawson Strategic Solutions had become more than a firm. It was becoming a symbol. My father, proud as ever, called me after each new milestone. Your mother would have loved this, he said one night. Not the press, not the money, just the fact that you did it your way. In quiet moments, I still reread her letter. You are smarter than they think, stronger than they believe. She had prepared me for this, and I had finally proven she was right. By summer's end, our office walls were covered with new plaques and framed letters, recognitions from healthcare networks, entrepreneurial awards, letters of thanks from interns mentored through the Evelyn Fund. The firm was no longer just mine. It had become a living, breathing tribute to everyone who believed in something better than survival. One morning, Harper barged into my office, her eyes wide with disbelief and a folder in her hand. You're not going to believe this, she said, dropping the folder onto my desk. It was a formal acquisition proposal. A major consulting conglomerate from New York wanted to buy Dawson Strategic Solutions. Full ownership, 8 figures. I stared at the number, then at the fine print. They wanted my name, my firm, my story, everything. Harper watched me closely. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, this isn't the first time someone tried to take what we built. She blinked. But this time, they're offering you everything. They're offering money, I said. But not everything. I kept the offer to myself for a few days, walked through the office more intentionally, listened to conversations between our teams, peeked into mentorship sessions where young women were learning things I had to claw through alone. And late one evening, I sat at my desk with both letters in front of me, my mother's and Sabrina's. Sabrina's letter was still unsigned, but I could tell it had come from somewhere real. A raw place of confusion and clarity colliding. I hadn't written back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say yet. Instead, I picked up a pen and wrote a different letter. To the board of the acquiring company, thank you for your interest. At this time, Dawson Strategic Solutions is not for sale. What we offer here cannot be replicated, replaced, or repackaged. What we've built is not just a brand. It's a mission, and it's not finished. The next day, I sent the letter. Harper looked both relieved and inspired. You did the right thing, she said. I did the true thing, I corrected. There's a difference. My father dropped by that evening with dinner, Chinese takeout, and a file folder filled with old photos he just found. There was one of my mother on her first business trip. She looked exhausted and radiant at the same time, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, confidence in every step. She'd be proud of you, he said again. Stop saying that, I teased, though my voice softened. Say something else. He smiled. Fine. She'd be learning from you now. That night I worked late, but not on spreadsheets or pitches. I was drafting a new division within the Evelyn Fund, one focused on helping women re-enter the workforce after family crises. Women like my mother. Women like the younger version of me. The ones with nowhere to go but forward. The next morning, I found another letter at the door. Not from Sabrina. Not from a journalist. It was from a young woman named Lena, one of our interns. She wrote about how she had grown up watching her mother be pushed out of opportunity after her father's death. How she never imagined someone would care enough to build a space like this. How the firm had changed how she saw herself. How she now wanted to start her own. I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. This was it. The real inheritance. Not the trust fund. Not the firm. but the belief that what we build with courage, what we protect with care, can outlive us in the most powerful ways. Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, we were just getting started. It was during a quiet Tuesday in late September when Harper walked into my office again, but this time not with data sheets or contracts. She held her phone out, eyes gleaming, and said simply, "You need to see this." A video was playing. A student conference panel. The speaker was a young woman, barely 22, nervous at first, but passionate. She spoke about empowerment, betrayal, rebuilding, and mentorship. And then she said my name. "I wouldn't be here if I hadn't met Claire Dawson," she said. "Not because she handed me anything, but because she showed me what standing your ground really looks like." I couldn't breathe for a second. My voice echoed on a stage I had never stepped foot on. That evening, I stayed in the office late, reflecting in the stillness. My mother used to say that impact wasn't about being remembered, it was about being repeated. Now, her wisdom was being passed along through me, through Harper, through dozens of interns and clients and colleagues. We had opened our third office that month, this one in Chicago. Our model had changed the way some regional firms approached restructuring, more mentorship-driven, more client-empowered. It wasn't just strategy. It was sustainability, the kind my mother would have called real-world proof. One evening, I received a formal invitation from a national women's business coalition. They were holding a gala and wanted to award me their Legacy Builder honor, an accolade reserved for those whose work demonstrated generational impact. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't chasing titles. I had spent years just trying to hold the pieces together, only to realize I'd built something far bigger than I thought. At the gala, my father attended as my guest. He wore his old Navy suit, the one he hadn't worn since my high school graduation. When they announced my name, the applause was warm but distant, like I was watching someone else walk on stage. The MC handed me the microphone and said, "Would you like to say a few words?" I looked around, at rows of women, at young interns, older mentors, executives, and dreamers. "I used to believe silence was strength," I said, "that keeping your head down and pushing forward meant you were winning. But sometimes, silence is just survival." I didn't start living until I learned to speak. And not just speak, but lead, decide, protect, and build. There was no applause at first. Just stillness. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the room followed. Not for me. For every woman in that room who had ever been told to wait her turn. After the ceremony, a quiet figure approached me. I recognized her immediately, Sabrina. She looked older, tired maybe, but steadier. She didn't reach for a hug or launch into an apology. She simply said, "Thank you for doing what none of us could." I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "You didn't fight to prove anything to us. You fought to protect what was yours. And somehow, you still left space for the rest of us to figure out who we are." We stood in silence. "I don't need to be in your life," she added, "but I'm cheering for you anyway." And then she left. Later, back at the hotel, I opened my mother's journal again. I'd brought it with me, half out of habit, half for strength. Inside the back pocket, I found a small note I'd somehow missed before. It was dated 3 weeks before she passed. "Claire, when the time comes, you will have to make hard choices. Some will say you're being selfish. Some will say you owe them comfort. But listen closely. Your life is yours to build. Do it with pride. And do it in peace." I closed the journal and rested it on the nightstand. Outside, the skyline of a city I didn't grow up in flickered with light. Somewhere down the hall, Harper and 2 new hires were likely still reviewing presentation slides. And I, at last, let myself rest. Not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed to carry it all alone. In my silence, my mother's voice still echoed. And this time, it wasn't in my head. It was in the voices of the women now rising behind me. It was a clear morning when I returned to Denver one last time. Not for business, not for confrontation, but for something quieter. My father had decided to move out of the old house. He said it was time. Too many ghosts in the corners, too many echoes in the halls. He was moving into a smaller place closer to his volunteer work, and he asked if I wanted to help clear out the attic before the house was listed. I arrived early. The air was crisp, laced with pine and memory. The moment I stepped inside, It felt like walking through the stillness of a museum dedicated to both love and forgetting. Some rooms were almost untouched, others stripped bare, revealing the outlines of furniture that had once shaped my childhood. We worked in silence for a while, boxing old photo albums, sorting forgotten things. My mother's coat still hanging behind the basement door, a cracked teacup she never threw out. Even one of my grade school drawings still taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet. It was like the house had quietly held on to the pieces we weren't ready to carry. In the attic, beneath a stack of dusty books, I found a box marked ED Private. I looked at my father. He nodded for me to open it. Inside were more of her journals, but also cassette tapes, old, labeled in her neat handwriting. Client Strategy, 1996. Workshop Notes, 1999. And one, unlabeled except for a single word. Claire. We didn't have a player with us. But later that night, I brought it back to Seattle and had one of our interns digitize it. I listened to it alone in my office after hours. At first, it was background noise, papers rustling, the hum of a desk lamp. Then her voice. Claire, sweetheart, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but just in case you do, I want you to know. I see you, even when I'm not there anymore. I see who you're becoming. I see the choices you're going to have to make. And I want you to know that you have nothing to prove. Not to me. Not to anyone. Just live well. Love deeply. And fight only when you must. The world can be cruel, yes. But you don't have to be. You only need to be sure of who you are. The audio ended with soft breathing. I sat there in the dark long after the clip stopped playing, the screen faded, and the city grew quiet around me. There was no need for tears anymore. Just reverence. A week later, we hosted a small event in Denver. A new branch of the Evelyn Fund was opening in partnership with a local business incubator. We set it up in a refurbished building, just blocks from where my mother had opened her first consulting office. The room was packed with young women, local professionals, and a few familiar faces, including the real estate agent who had helped her sign her first lease. I opened the event with just 5 words. This started in my mother's attic. Everyone laughed, but they understood. It wasn't about inheritance anymore. It wasn't even about revenge or survival or winning. It was about planting seeds in places no one else thought to look. After the event, I walked the long block alone. Denver looked different now, warmer somehow. Not because it had changed, but because I had. When I returned to Seattle, Harper had placed something new on the wall outside my office door. It was a brass plaque that read, "The house we rebuilt without walls," and underneath, "Founded by Claire Dawson, inspired by Evelyn, carried by every voice that refuses to be silenced, ****. I touched the plaque gently and smiled, not because the story had ended, but because I knew now. It never really had a beginning. It was always waiting to be told.